Currently, I am professor of religion, and I'm also chair of what's called the Liberal Studies Department, which includes several different disciplines here on campus. I have a long-standing connection with the Franciscans, and so I also continue my research on the Franciscans, so that's the area that I'm interested in academically as well as personally. So there's a personal academic interest in topics that are Franciscan. And when my wife and I moved down here, we were stunned to discover so much Franciscan history. We had a sense that there was something here, of course, but then everywhere we went, we were hearing stories and talking to people who mentioned different things about the friars who had been here. And as we began to discover that on our own, I began to think more and more of how I might be able to orchestrate, if you will, some sort of conference gathering of scholars here so that we could hear more about the story of the Franciscans here in Florida, and in particular St. Augustine. Because I've always been convinced, as long as I've come to know the story here, is that this is a story that's simply not told. I was up at a small school by the name of Mitchell College, which is up in Connecticut, New London, Connecticut. And I had previously been at a number of different institutions. We had been up there for about 3 years. And I was looking for something that had more teaching involved. I was at Mitchell College involved in some administrative as well as teaching, and I really wanted to do more teaching, and the position opened up here, and as things turned out, I was able to get the position. I work with the Franciscans on a number of different levels. I was the Duino visiting scholar at St. Bonaventure University, so I spent a semester there at the Franciscan Institute. I'm on their board for the translation series of St. Bonaventure, and I've also translated St. Bonaventure's Sunday Sermon Cycle. I have done a number of different things for the Institute. Even last summer, for example, I was invited to speak to the core faculty there on the question of Franciscan pedagogy and the liberal arts. So I do a lot of work with different Franciscan groups in addition to publishing. I was originally in Minnesota, that's where I'm from, suburb of Minneapolis, Minnetonka, and started college at Mankato State, which is south of Minnetonka. And I had come to see that I wanted to study theology, and I was very interested in the Franciscan order, so I went down to St. Louis and I finished my bachelor's degree there. I did a bachelor's in theology. At that time I was affiliated with the Franciscan order, and they asked me if I would go to study in Europe. And so I said, yes, very much so. And so I went to Rome, and I stayed at a place called the Seraphicum, which is the College of the Conventual Franciscans with whom I was affiliated at that time. And so I ended up spending 6 years actually in Rome. I did what's called a bachelor's of theology, then I did a license, and then I began my doctoral studies. I did the bachelor's with the Franciscans, and then I moved over to do what's called the license and the doctorate with the Jesuits at the Gregorian University, which is the Central Universal Jesuit University in Rome. At that time, I wanted to, as I had all the way along, wanted to do something on Franciscans, and I proposed the subject of St. Bonaventure in prayer. So my dissertation is on St. Bonaventure's theology of prayer. And as I was going through that, I realized that I really needed to learn German. So through some connections I had, I moved up and I lived with the Franciscans in Munich for 5 years and finished off my dissertation there. I think one thing that I was hoping for would be to bring focus to the question of the Franciscans in La Florida, in Florida here, because like I said, I really do believe that it's a story that's not really told. So I wanted people to get a sense of how important Florida is for Franciscan history. And I think that was really accomplished well. I'm very happy because there was clearly a shift in emphasis, and even many people who are familiar with the California missions had no idea that this was in fact a possibility, that there was so much missionary activity here, not only that there was in the past, but also that it's still ongoing archaeologically. So that was important. I also have a real strong interest in interdisciplinary study. I think perhaps because of my own interest in studying abroad studying languages, art, etc., I've always been trying to find ways to connect disciplines. So one of the ideas that I had was to try to get together the best that I could in the areas of archaeology, anthropology, theology, linguistics, history, to try to get these people together in some sort of interdisciplinary dialogue, with the hope that in fact they would start to see that they could make connections in ways that perhaps they didn't know. And that certainly was another success from my perspective. There's some very, very interesting dialogue going on. And I hoped also, I guess I could say, to show the school in the city to people as well, to make them see that not only with the Franciscan history, but the Spanish history in Florida is something that has been really forgotten as well. And as I talk to people as they wander around and they eat out and they go to the beach and they go to the different places, I think that that has been a success as well. If you look at the program, the way I tried to conceptualize it, it's almost like a table of contents. In other words, I wanted it to move from the medieval to Florida, then out towards California. Beyond that, I think what will happen is, I'm hoping, is we heard at the end of the conference today some different ideas. David Hurst Thomas spoke, and Garrett Melville spoke about things we might be able to do in the future. So what I would like to do is get the people together online in some shape or form and ask them what would be the best way to move forward, because we have to have it focused. My idea was to be very general, to give an overview from the medieval up to the California experience. I wanted to be able to show the arc of the story, because that, from my perspective, was what's missing. It's always a little regional paper here, a city book there. I wanted people to begin to think across the borderlands, not that that's the only way or that's some great meta-narrative that explains everything, but to start thinking about that. But now once we've sort of put that out there, what are the questions that start to emerge, especially in an interdisciplinary, inter-regional comparison? Because we heard some very interesting things. For example, David Hurst Thomas at the end was talking about this reality that's fascinating, that the friars come here and are able to integrate very easily into the structure of the villages. Yet when they're out in New Mexico, there's revolts, there's uprisings. Why is that? Why is that? So even having those two groups there together, the Florida group and the group from New Mexico, or someone like David who's looking over the whole thing, shows you the questions that emerge in a very interesting way when you bring the different groups together. So I'm hoping that we can identify a question that we could go deeper in, but that would include that sort of broad exchange as well. And then the fact that Arizona State was also interested was another added benefit, where I could begin to see that this conference was going to have a ripple effect in a way that I hadn't imagined. What I would hope for is that Flagler College and Arizona State in some way could begin to develop a relationship that would have to do with what I'm very interested in, and that's spirituality and theology. What I find lacking, and maybe it's just because I'm outside my area, I'm a medievalist, so I don't know all these sources, but I'm very interested in finding out more about the spiritual texts that were being used in the borderlands. In other words, what were the texts that people were reading? What were the friars reading? What were they preaching from? What were they disseminating to people? I'm very interested to try to see to what degree those texts reflect the spirituality of that time. So anyway, even a website could begin to collect texts or bibliography of text would be something that would be very helpful, because then I can then bring students in to begin them to have them to begin considering these texts as well. When it comes to academics, it really comes down to what a person is interested. And so I would say for Hispanics or any students, what disciplines are you looking at? What do you want to study? Do we have what you're interested in? Beyond that, I would think that there must be some sort of experience of rediscovered pride to come to a place like this. What I find so often, and my wife, of course, is professor of Spanish here, and we notice all the time people speaking Spanish, but they're typically not from the area. They're from Central and South America. In other words, this is a location place for many people who believe that there's something special that happened for them in their history. So my hope would be that Hispanic students would feel the pride of coming to a place like this and realizing not only is this part of Hispanic history, but it's an ongoing history. In other words, there are many people who are still coming today from Central, Southern America, all over Latin America to come here because it's a special place. And I think to be a part of that. One of the critiques sometimes we hear from students is students are saying, oh, there's all these trams and all these tourists. And I say to them, isn't it great that you live in a place that people pay for to come? They pay to come here. You're in a great place. And I think in particular for someone with a Hispanic background who would feel this in a certain way that many students wouldn't, it would be especially powerful.